following is a recording of a March 3rd, 2019 presentation at the Rondout Valley Holistic Healing Community by Shulamit Elson, creator of MediSounds, a Kabbalistically based sound meditation process. For more information regarding Shulamit's work, books, and audio CDs, please visit her website, shulamitElson.com.
So today, I'm going to talk about forgiveness, self-forgiveness, forgiveness of others, something which we all have difficulty in doing, even though we know it's the noble thing to do, and teach you a methodology that will get you there. And I'm also going to work with you with sound. I'm going to teach you some sounds which are coming from an ancient tradition that was written about in the 13th century. These are all Kabbalistically based sounds. The format is going to be I'm going to talk, and I'm going to ask you to get involved, ask questions, speak about specific issues that might concern you so that we can have a lively and warm and communal event. The sound is something that you can take home with you, that you can use. It's fairly easy to learn. Of course, like everything else, you have to do it. But if you can take it home and you can find that it has a big implication in softening a lot of different aspects of your life. My name is Shulamit. I was raised in Brooklyn, and I moved up here about, it's a long time now, maybe 30 years ago. And I'm between here and New York City working, splitting the time kind of half and half, although lately I'm kind of moving more up here. I came to this work, well, I don't know if it was by accident exactly, but I was very ill. When I was in my 20s, I got really, really sick. I mean, like dying kind of sick. I had kidney disease that was incurable, and they had medicine, but it didn't work. And this was in the 60s, so they were just beginning to offer transplants, but the likelihood of your surviving it in those days was not very high. And the other thing, of course, was dialysis. But I was a young woman. I was in my 20s. So all of a sudden, instead of all this kind of flow when you're young, that everything is before you and so on, instead I was kind of, I think the phrase from some movie I saw is girl interrupted. I mean, my life was completely interrupted and stopped. And I had to go to Mount Sinai Hospital every week, carrying 24 hours of urine sample, which in those days you had to put in a glass container because they didn't have any of the high-tech stuff they have today. And I remember thinking on the subway, one day the subway's going to lurch. And this is going to be the most embarrassing moment of my life. But anyway, that didn't happen. So I took Prednisone, which some of you may be familiar with. I hope you're not, but it's a miracle drug, but also has some fairly disastrous side effects. And I took massive doses of it for a year, and then you couldn't tell what was making me sick, or the illness, or the drug. And the doctor said I should try it for a year, and I did, and nothing happened. My labs were always the same. So I told him I wanted to stop, and he said, your body's not a clock, you got to give it time. And I said, I'm just suffering too much. I was really suffering. I have a biblical training, so the afflictions of Job, both inside and outside my body. So I did go see another consulting physician at NYU, and he said, I wouldn't bother with the drugs. I've seen your biopsy. I've never seen anybody recover from this. And just go home and live your life and forget about these drugs. And I was really stunned because, of course, you put your faith, you put your heart, you look at the doctor and you say, this is my savior. They don't necessarily say that that's what they are, but that's what you do. You invest them with that kind of incredible power. And all of a sudden I understood that these guys were artists just as much as they were scientists. And maybe their guess was as good as mine. So I did stop the medication. It took a few months to come off from it. And I went about my life, and I don't know how long, maybe a year and a half later, I had a spontaneous remission, completely healed, never got sick from that thing again. Never got sick. That's more than 50 years ago. That was the physical side. The mental side was what's wrong? How do I want to live my life? If I live, what do I want to do? All I knew is I was very unhappy. I was very unhappy. I was very unhappy in my life. I had a lot of reverses. Even though I was young, I had lots of reverses. And so I decided that if I ever got better, I made the commitment to myself to be happier, which, of course, I had no clue of how to do. But I had the intention. And so I started, first of all, the first thing I did was I got a regular, straight-up kind of job because I thought that part of my unhappiness was trying to be like an artist and trying to do things that maybe I wasn't equipped to do. And so I got a regular job, which I was completely unsuited for. And I mean, from a happiness standpoint, I'm bright enough to manage, And I was looking, I was searching. And, there's a Russian expression, two steps backward for every step forward. So, I was really lost. But I was trying. And I don't really know exactly how these things are, but I think when you hold it in front of your eyes like this and say, I'm going to find this, even though you don't know how, and somehow you trip and you trip and you trip, and somehow it works out. So somehow in the 1960s, there was a guy called Herbert Benson. He was an MD from Harvard, and he wrote a book which at the time was like a big revolution. It was called The Relaxation Response. And it basically said, if you meditate, you can improve your cardiac health. That's what he was writing about. So I got the book, and he had a little meditation in there, and I tried it, and it had this phenomenal effect on me. I thought, my God, what is this? This is just amazing. So I started to work with it. I didn't have any particular instruction, and after a time, I began to. These sounds arose in me. There was like an impulse, it was like demanding to be heard. And of course, I wasn't a singer. And I used to say, it's God's little joke that I can't sing, because I love to sing. But anyway, I started to feel this desire to make sounds, and I would make them. But I made them in the privacy of my bedroom. We were living in an apartment in New York, and I had to go into the bedroom because that was off the corridor. The living room was attached to the corridor. And I was afraid people would hear me and send for the psych ward or something. And I practiced it, and then I started trying it out with people. And it turns out that I had certain gifts of insight, that the sounds allowed me to see into people. And so I began to widen my, I tried with 2 or 3 people, then with 5 people, and I began to. But then I thought, well, what is this? What is this thing that I'm doing? Because I had it was coming to me, but it had no foundation. So I began to look, where can I find? And I was instructed to look into the Kabbalah. And of course, I was raised as an Orthodox Jew, so that's like a no-no for women. And even though I was long left the practice of Orthodox Judaism, I still had that, this is a bad thing to do. But my curiosity overcame my scruples. And I began to look into it, and I found a book where this book was very serious, and it had a lot of annotations, and it told you where to find things, but it had one paragraph, 3 sentences long, and it said some Kabbalists think that sound has a very strong application to this system, but it didn't annotate it at all. But anyway, what it ended up with was that I had a system that I developed, which I call MediSounds, which is using these sounds that were written about in the 13th century that have a deep correlation to Scripture, so that every sound has a power because it's correlated to something in Scripture, and it is indeed very powerful. So I began to work with this, and I've been doing it for years. Okay, so let me go back to forgiveness, because that's the main topic of the day. What I've found over the years, first in myself, because my journey to teaching and my journey to the sound is really my journey through my own confusion. It wasn't like, I picked up a book and I said, oh, wow, this explains everything. I was confused, which is not unusual for most people. I was very confused, and I was very, very uncomfortable in my own skin. I was really uncomfortable. Wherever I was, it was never right. I couldn't find my place until I began to explore this work. So one thing that's very clear is that most people I think there was a survey once, I think it's the biggest thing that people want is inner peace. Well, part of being peaceful internally is of course coming to reconcile in yourself, and the big part of that is forgiveness. Forgiveness of yourself, first of all. I'm talking about the small things too, like you beat yourself up because you wore the wrong clothes, or you said the wrong thing, or you didn't live up to your parents' expectations or your own expectations, or you haven't met your marks or your goals. And then, of course, there are the things that we've done to other people, some of which cannot be taken back. You know, some things are devastating that we've done to other people. Some things are devastating that we've done to ourselves. So there's levels of seriousness, in a sense, of forgiveness. And then things happen, you know, things happen in the world that are very harsh. And we have to deal with them. But the kind of forgiveness that I'm talking about, the self-forgiveness, which is crucial for inner peace, also allows you to forgive other people. And it's based on a very, very simple but profound idea, which is that we are human beings. We are human beings, which means that we have grandeur and generosity and kindness and sweetness and love and light, and we're also shits. We also are mean, we also are stingy. I'm not talking about all the time, but you know, we also do things that are not, we have aspects of our nature which are not nice. Or all of those things. And as Gurdjieff said, we are not human beings trying to be spiritual. We are spiritual human beings trying to figure out how to be human. So think of the things that you have to reconcile. You have to reconcile your animal needs, food, lust, need for shelter. How are you going to get that? How much do you have to compete? How nasty do you have to be to somebody at work, etc.? You have to reconcile that with your emotional life, which is something maybe at odds sometimes with your physical life. You may have a commitment in your marriage, but your lust might be taking you somewhere else. I mean, these things are at war. You have your intellectual life. You have a lot of things going on, and we're trying to make that into one person. Forgiveness becomes the essential component of this, because since we're human beings, if we could really have compassion for our situation, I mean, genuine compassion, we don't always hit the mark the way we want to. I mean, you watch these people in power. Some of them are so hungry for power, and then you watch them as they get it, and then it collapses away from them. You know, we can't hold on to things the way we would like to. We work very hard to build a certain kind of life, and then we want to hold on to everything, our children, our houses, our work, but the reality is you can't. And at a certain point, sadness or tragedy comes to us, and we see, or change, and we see that we lose things again. And maybe we compare ourselves to these mythical people who never lose anything, but there is no such person. There's no such person. We have relatives we get angry at, and we're bitter toward them, and we can't overcome what they've done to us, right? We're angry. And the friends might say to us, you have to forgive them. Don't you realize what this anger is doing to you? But it's hard. It's really hard. Sometimes you don't want to forgive because you're afraid you're going to let the other person get away with something, right? If you forgive them, now they didn't get punished. But even if that's not the case, it's just really hard because we hang on to that pain, that hurt. So coming at it from the angle of saying you must forgive because it's good for you, I don't think it's very effective. I'm not saying it doesn't work sometimes, but it's not very effective. The way to come to it easily is through compassion. What does that mean? It means that you accept that you are also, for example, a fool and an idiot, and you acted out of anger, and you acted out of ignorance, and you acted out of greed. And that's part of who you are as a human being. So I'm not saying that you say, oh, hey, I acted badly and it's okay because I'm a human being. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying you can get soft about it, and you can say, I see in the other person, what the other person has just now done to me, I recognize that in myself. I share that humanity with them, because I have also been stingy and mean-spirited and withholding, and sometimes I've done really nasty things. You can see that in the other person, feel the compassion for the humanity of the other person, for their confusion, for their blindness, for their inability to see, for their stupidity in action. And that softens everything. And it also softens it for you. It also softens it for you. Because you suddenly, well, your expectations are not quite so, inflated. Let me put it that way. Sometimes we behave very well, but I don't know that that's a consistent thing that any one of us can say about our behavior in our life. Kindness comes from compassion. It comes from seeing the suffering of another. It comes from relating to the suffering of another. And once you feel that compassion, you can forgive. You don't even have to try. The forgiveness comes naturally. So compassion is a practice. And you have to practice it because it's not instinctive. Instinct is that if I push you, you're either going to push back or you're going to back off. That's instinct. That's animal instinct. We're all like that. This is a higher level. This is where you don't react, but you stop and you wait to respond.
I recently came across some teachings and practices called regenetics, and they use the solfeggio notes and vowel sounds, which can be done in person or remotely. And I was wondering if you know, have you heard about that? And is there any overlay in terms of?
The sounds that I use are based on the vowel sounds. So there's no words, and there's no meaning. There's no attempt to persuade, and there's no intellect. It's really coming from a much deeper place, which is in the origins of the universe. And many traditions, probably best known in the Hindu or the Buddhist tradition, use sound as the core, the way to connect to something greater than yourself. Yes?
I just had a reflection that I wanted to share with the last piece you were talking about in terms of forgiveness, which I've heard so many times, people talking about, well, forgive because you'll let go of your anger, you'll let go of your pain, and insight that I just had is I don't have a strong experience of feeling anger and pain because of certain things that happened, sexual abuse at a very young age. My reaction was to numb. So the motivation to reach for forgiveness, because it would be an absence or a letting, it never motivated me enough because I wasn't aware of being in any pain because I had so successfully numbed that experience. But the reason I showed up today is because I have had a much more motivating experience, which is to start to develop the desire to love, which is a feeling, which is very motivating. It's like the carrot, but a really juicy carrot, and that forgiveness has been one of my paths to finding greater capacity to experience that very, the highest of perhaps of human experiences. And at some point when I understood that might be the case, it made it possible to be willing to do the work and to get more motivated to forgive.
Life is pain. Love is pain. I mean, love is love. Love is beautiful. Love is supportive and energizing, but it also brings pain with it, loss, so on, So the willingness, the desire to love is actually a very courageous act. I'm sorry. I said the willingness to love is actually courageous. It's a courageous act to be willing to love. Because the reality is that love brings pain. It brings sweetness too, but it also brings pain. Especially if there's loss or illness or death or whatever, it brings pain. So the willingness to love is actually a courageous act. It's an act of trust, it's an act of faith, it's an act of connection to something much greater than ourselves. It's a willingness to say, I risk my heart. I risk my heart. And, you risk your heart, you can get hurt. And, right? And, it can't happen without, love can't happen in a sense without risk, without faith. So I applaud you. And you don't have to come from the point of view of forgiveness. You can come from other points of view. For example, the desire for connection, which is, I think, what you're expressing. Something greater than yourself. And once you connect with that, sometimes you get more and more courage to actually engage and to be more loving. And unfortunately, with abuse and with the repression of memory of abuse, eventually it comes out, the memory. So it's a good thing to be very, very, very kind to yourself. Because one of the questions that people have who've been abused is, why me? Is there something essentially like wicked or horrible or evil that I've been chosen for this? Especially if you're young and you're completely innocent and you have no idea why. So there can be, I'm not saying it's in your case, there can be some self-hatred that comes up or judgment that comes up against the self. And that's the same idea. You're basically taking the cruelty of another and allowing it to define you. Now, the person may be cruel for all sorts of reasons having nothing to do with you, right? But you take it as you're defining, and then there's tremendous suffering with that. I mean, everybody's got a different story here. If we went around the room, everybody would have a different story, and some part of that story is going to involve pain and disappointment and all sorts of things. And yet here we are, and our commitment, our gift, or whatever, is to love. To love, to be loved, and to both enjoy and suffer the consequences of that. I do want to teach you a tool, right, for generating compassion and to bring softness into your life. So put your hand on your heart. Begin to make the ah sound and make it over and over again until I ring the bell. And the object of your sound is yourself, sending compassion to yourself. And don't forget that I will lead you through this so you don't have to remember anything, okay? So begin with the sound of ah, sending compassion to yourself. Now we're going to send the sound of compassion to the people we love, some of whom might be suffering with illness or financial troubles, or etc. We turn our attention to the people that bring us difficulty and send them compassion. Now we turn our attention to all of the human beings and animals and whatever, all the conscious beings in the world. And we turn our attention to the world, to the people who are suffering from poverty or disease or war. And we send them compassion for their plight. And for the final sounds, we return to ourselves, sending us compassion for our lives, for our difficulties, for our joys, for our sorrows, for our loveliness, for our smallness, for the whole catastrophe. First of all, that was very beautiful. I thank you for contributing your voices so wholeheartedly. If anybody wants to say anything, please speak.
That is such hard work. Holy mackerel.
Did you
It's so
feel-
much like, it's hard. You know, you think you just hold a note, or if you sing a song in the car, it's not as difficult. It's really difficult work, I see it.
Did you feel it being difficult physically? Like, in other words, just making the sound?
I felt my nostril and nose area feel cold, and my lips feel hot, and then to keep yourself in the space to do the work was hard. I wanted to get up. I wanted to leave, leave the practice or leave the exercise.
Did other people have a similar experience of difficulty? Yes.
Actually hurt.
Your voice?
Yeah.
Remember to rest.
I tried.
Yeah, not a contest.
Obviously it didn't shut me up.
Yes.
I felt like on the sounding that it was almost like there's a lot of heat coming out of my mouth and like releasing, like a releasing feeling. And I feel a lot of work happens in the heart area. There's a lot still going on in there.
Experiences of calm, anybody? Or
I had an experience of being carried.
that's lovely.
The sound was carrying me, and then something energetically inside. I know what you mean about it being hard in the sense of to sustain that. But I think that's the resilience that you were talking about. It's like, and then it would be easy. It was ever changing. It was ever changing, but that sense of being carried was the dominant feeling, and the sense of it moving in all directions, the sound, like the vibration, not just here, but moving in all directions. So it was very, I was going to say lovely, but that's not the word. It was very,
I've been having like spikes in my blood pressure, but after this, my heart feels very calm, my vision is better. I think my circulation is just so much better now. Thank you.
Yes.
Like many practices, for me it was difficult at the beginning, but then as I kept surrendering to it, I really did feel like I was floating on a river, a fluid medium. And the key for me was really listening to the authentic sound that wanted to come from my heart, and not, sound that I thought would blend well, and soften with it, not to push it, just really quietly, tenderly offer it. And once I did that, I felt like I was floating.
Well, that's
Before
actually.
I did that, I was like swimming in the river.
It's actually key because it's actually antithetical to the goal to strive.
Yeah.
It really is, should be done gently. And I do want to say, there's a lot of different, this is just one sound. There are sounds for different aspects of your nature and the body and so on. And when you're making them, if there's tension in you, or if there's difficulties that you're having in that particular area, you're going to feel it with the sound. The sound is going to feel contracted. It's going to feel difficult. And in a sense, that's why you have to do more work there, in that particular area. So if you're having, a lot of sorrow or your pain because of something that's happening in your life, then your heart's not going to want to open because your need is to guard it, which you should respect. I'm not saying you shouldn't respect it, but to always do things with gentleness and to reassure yourself. So that's really, I'm really glad you had that you shared that, and you had that experience.
Is there another discipline with just sounds? Because I had an experience where I was in a car with somebody and we saw a fight. Two guys got off a bike and it looked like they were going to kill each other. And she got out and started making sounds. She studied in sound, and that's why I asked, I don't know what she, and they parted. And it was unbelievable.
There's,
And it was
yeah.
an amazing impact on these two guys. Looked like they were going to kill each other. You know any other discipline?
The sounds have a profound power to transform and to shift all kinds of things. So that, for example, in my private work, I work with people who, you know, for whatever reason are stuck in something. It's based on things that happen to us and ideas and whatever, but we also have stuck places in us, and you can reach people through the sound because you're not talking to them, you're not lecturing them, you're not saying this is the way it is or this is the way it isn't, because the sounds have no cognitive expression. They're not trying to prove anything to you. That's where the power is. And the power is because it is actually based on universal sounds. The world was created with sound, which is true in all the traditions, particularly the Hindu and, you know, even in the Christian, the beginning, there was the word. Sound is what created the world. And when we're dealing with these esoteric sounds, we're actually connecting to a very deep part of ourselves and a deep part of the cosmos. That's why they're reassuring. That's why they're calming. Because you're suddenly not alone just with your thoughts or your ideas or your sorrows. You're not connected to the whole experience of whatever this is.
Or your vocabulary or your language.
Well, this goes beyond language because, well, look, I mean, I'm not saying language is useful. We're creatures of meaning. We have to understand what's happening to us. But sometimes we create stories that just reinforce the same thing over and over and over again, and we've got to enter in from a different viewpoint to see what's really going on. We live in a world where you know everything, right? I mean, you're bombarded with all this information, you know everything, you know what to eat and how it's going to act on this part of the body, or at least until they change their minds, but you know everything. But you really don't know anything. Yes, and it's so relaxing when you finally realize that. Because I'm a very intellectual person, and I've pursued knowledge and reading and so on. And I'm not saying I don't enjoy that, I do enjoy it. But the day that I realized that I really didn't know what was going on was like, whew, you know, so relaxing. Then you can just be, that's all. You can just be. You obviously, I'm not saying you abandon, you know, the things that are necessary to do life. I mean, of course, you continue with that. You know, research and you plan and you know, whatever. But at the same time, you know that your efforts are limited. They're limited. And you can see that when you come across a really difficult problem in life, you know, like if you have a child who's got addicted to drugs, or you've, you know, or a relative who's very ill, or, you know, you come up against it and you know that there's just limits to what you know and limits to what you can do. And if you can get more compassionate about that, which is, in fact, that's our reality. We really don't know that much. I know lots of people think they know a lot, but in reality, you don't know that much. Especially when you get really older and you know that you're coming to your death and all of that, you know. A lot of this baloney just gets stripped off of you, you know. So again, it's coming back all the time to compassion. If you're suffering, if somebody's hurt you, if you're closed up or whatever, to be kind about it. It doesn't have to be a permanent state. You can just say, now I'm going through a period which is very difficult. You know, now I'm going through, and let life kind of flow, because it does. It flows and it changes, you know.
I know with tuning forks and gongs,
Uh-huh.
it bypasses the brain. Does the sounds do the same? Same principle as that?
It's the same principle. I mean, you're dealing with vibration. You're dealing with vibration. And of course, if you think about vibration, there's all different kinds of vibration that you're very familiar with. I mean, you could do rap vibration, or you could do romantic, I don't know, Frank Sinatra vibration. You could do martial music, and your body responds to those kinds of vibrations. This is a different vibration. This is not trying to put you into a mood. This is not trying to elicit any kind of emotional or physical. It's really just the world that is, you know. And I find it incredibly comforting. In my early 30s, Allen Ginsberg, the beat poet, came to my town. He was going to give a speech at the Unitarian Church, so I went over to hear him. But he didn't do that. He just led us in Om. And of course, I had never heard of this, let alone experienced it. And I was like, what? I couldn't believe how transported I was. And then I left the church, and I didn't think about it again for another 12 years. Completely went out of my mind. But, you know, sounds like Om from the Hindu tradition, when you make them, you get it. You know, you get it whether you start out disbelieving or thinking it's nonsense, you get it. Your system gets it. And you don't have to call it by a name. You don't have to, some people don't believe in God, some people believe in this God or the other God. This is a universal force that you're connecting with. And you don't have to name it, or at least you don't have to be pushed away by dogma. Basically, if you can start practicing compassion, it takes practice, because basically we also live on an animal level, which is flight or fight responses to, aggressions, pushing people away, getting pushed away, running away. All of this is animal nature. Compassion requires that you stop and look. It's an act of will. And it takes years to develop the muscle for it. It's a mental muscle. I guess they do some studies of Buddhist monks who practice compassion over 20 years, and actually their brain, has different patterns to it. You have to educate yourself. You have to educate yourself. And when you go in and have an unpleasant encounter, even if it's something very minor, like having an argument with the cashier or something at the supermarket, your first reaction might be to be angry and how dare they and blah, blah, blah. And then if you step back and say, well, okay, I see this person. Maybe they're having a bad day. Maybe she's not picking on me. Maybe I'm completely irrelevant to what's going on in her life. Maybe she's having a bad day. Maybe she's suffering. Maybe she's under a lot of pressure. Whatever it is, I see her as a human being. I know that I can also be very unpleasant when I'm under certain kinds of pressures. I see that. And then you're not tied to her anymore. You don't go home brooding about it or being upset about it. I mean, that's a trivial example, but we get involved in these trivial things very often. And the reality is, even though we think it's all about us, it isn't. I mean, I guess we're still children at heart, Yeah.
My assumption is that these sounds can be made at any time, in any place. You don't have to have your hand over your heart or anything like that. You just make the sound.
The hand over the heart was really just a way to give you the sense of the vibration, so that you could feel it, so you know you're doing it in the right place. And this sound cannot hurt you. There are other sounds which might exacerbate, one part of your being or another, but this sound cannot hurt you. This is a good, calm, kind sound. And in the tree of life, it is the closest to the Godhead. They say that compassion is the highest form of wisdom. And it is. Because if you start living your life that way, your life changes. I'm talking about the quality of your life changes in the moment. You don't have to have, like, I've been doing this for 20 years. You could start today and you'd notice a change. Your relative says something short-tempered or mean to you, and you stiffen, and now you're not going to call them for 3 days or whatever, or you're not going to show up for Thanksgiving or whatever your response is. If you start looking at it compassionately, you soften. It doesn't have a hold on you. You're not thinking about it, and your life just gets nicer. I'm all for a nicer life. That's really basically, living a happier, more balanced life with compassion for our neighbors, even though they may be very strange to us.
The sounds that you used in the opening, it wasn't ah.
No.
It was eh.
No, it was a combination of sounds.
Yeah. Well, I sort of went out after the first few minutes.
Yeah.
I went out after the first few minutes, so I might have missed something. But
No, I don't.
I'm curious about those.
There are actually 8 sounds which I use in combination. So if I'm working with a person, that's in front of me, I might use the sound to locate where the issue is. then use the sound to, like a sonar almost, then use the sound to open up that particular area. And it's accompanied by talking, so the person has meaning behind it, so they can, see whether it resonates with them, because you're not really telling them how it is. It's collaborative. It's a collaborative effort, and the sounds are very instructive. I once was working with a woman who said, "I've come to see you, but I don't want to tell you why. I want to see if you can tell me why." So I did some sounds, and the image I had was her with a flashlight in a cave, looking at the top of the cave with a flashlight. And I said to her, I think you fear that you have a brain tumor. And she said, I do feel that I have a brain tumor. She'd been working in a prison for, 30 years or something, and she really was, the toxicity of the place was really getting to her. She didn't have a brain tumor. It was time to go. It was time to leave that job, I guess. So when I'm working, the sounds give me an image which I interpret. And if it resonates with the person, then we can start working with it and unwinding it. Why do you, to help them release it. And in the end, it's really down to that you don't know why things happen, and you have to be kind. You have to be really kind. And I'm not talking about being mushy, like...
You're talking about being kind.
I'm just talking about being kind, yeah, to yourself. After all, life is hard enough, yes.
I see that you have some CDs there. So in those CDs, you produce these sounds with it.
Yes.
She has CDs on the table. So my question is, those CDs contain the sounds to produce for forgiveness or for, I saw some, I don't remember exactly all the items, but I saw that one is for forgiveness, another one is for pain. Can you explain what are those?
There are different sounds which I produce by setting my intention to produce a certain effect. So when you're listening to them, you're not going to hear like forgiveness, forgiveness, forgiveness. It's just going to be, you're going to feel the sensation, Okay. So what I have on here is remembering, clarity, release from fear, calm, release from pain, certainty, acceptance, connection, resolution, and wholeness.
Can you get the same effect by just thinking the sound, or do you have to be using your voice?
Certainly you can have an impact by thinking about being compassionate. If you carry that attitude around with you during the day, it will help you enormously in the moment, and over time you'll be able to accumulate it in your system so that you act from this higher vibration, if you will. But the sound actually silences the mind, which is the power of it, and also connects you to the vibration of compassion. So it's very powerful. But you can't walk around doing this all day, and in meetings or with difficult people. You can, but may not be that practical. And in that case, to remember to be compassionate is very helpful. I think that there is nothing that quite substitutes for the vibration. The vibration has an impact on your system. I've been doing this for, 30 years, and I can tell you that I'm completely changed. I'm the same person, but I used to be anxious, and I used to be, worried. I worried a lot, and I was anxious, and all those things are gone. I have concerns, just like anybody who's alive, but I am not consumed by them. Yes?
I'm curious as to how you began this practice. Was it the Kabbalistic tree of life as it designates sounds for different capacities, or how did you?
Well, when I started out, I didn't know the source of the sounds. So in the beginning, sounds arose in me, and they were very powerful. and they were very intriguing. Like, what the hell was this? I mean, I had absolutely no idea. But they were intriguing, and I practiced them. But I was searching around for some kind of, like, place to put it. Like, what did it mean, you know? Where did it come from? And I wasn't having a lot of success at the beginning, you know? But at some point, and I come from an Orthodox Jewish family, so Kabbalah is absolutely forbidden. Absolutely forbidden. Forbidden to women, forbidden to anybody under the age of 40, just forbidden. And in my family, my father always said, oh, you know, the Kabbalists, they're all crazy. You practice Kabbalah, you'll become crazy. So there was a lot of negative stuff about it, and I never, ever considered it as a path for me, never. Because even though I left my religious practice when I was 18, and actually never went back to it, I still carry the teachings of my father in me, and I did not look at this. But when I started having this experience of the sounds, and wanting to make sounds, and realizing that they were very powerful, although I didn't know why or how, or they seemed kind of random to me, you know. They were coming from who knows where. But now I'm compelled. I mean, I got to find out what this is, you know. And I started looking around, and I didn't have any success. And if I asked anybody, you know, within the Jewish system, they don't even want to talk to you about it. It's considered so out there, you know. But I mean, I was pushed to try to find something, and I was instructed. I'm talking instructed. I have a disembodied teacher who instructs me. I'm not talking about, you know, going to a class. I have a disembodied teacher. They said, look into the Kabbalah. I was a little afraid of it because of my background. It's supposed to drive you crazy. It's supposed to be very, very bad. Very bad. But, you know, curiosity overcame that. So I began to investigate a little bit, and I read some books. They were all very complicated. They were all very, in some sense, off-putting because they're very complex, and you know, and I didn't really quite follow it. But I was driven by this need to know, and I wasn't really getting anywhere, to be honest with you. Then in 2001, that's not so, you know, something like that, I went to Israel and I met a guy. I was telling him about my experience. He said, oh, that. He said, that's in that book. I mean, it was sort of like I said, do you know where to get a good orange around here? And he said, yeah, the supermarket is down the road. I mean, it was that simple. And so, of course, the material is written in Aramaic. It's very dense. It's in the Zohar. It's incomprehensible to a large degree. And but there was also a very well-known rabbi by the name of Gikatia from Andalusia, Spain, and he wrote a little book, very, very little book, very esoteric about the sounds. He calls it the Book of the Dots, because in Hebrew the sounds are signified by dots. And I read it. It was very intense, as I said, very, almost in a sense also kind of incomprehensible, but I kind of got it. And I felt validated, because here was something that said, okay, you're on the right path. And I began to practice it, apply it to the tree of life, which is a symbol within Kabbalistic teaching, and found that their sounds are actually assigned to the different aspects of the tree, to what are called the sphirot. And I just started to work with it. And of course, I have gifts. I have the ability to see into people. I have the ability to bring healing sometimes, not all the time. And this became the vehicle for me to put my gifts into, to give it a discipline, to not just be all over the place. And I began to use that model of the tree of life and use the sounds of the tree of life, and my practice just got deeper and deeper, and I just got better and better and better at it. I was never given any encouragement by the community. Basically, they said, this is no good, this is not for you, it's not for you, and anyway, they didn't necessarily know what I was talking about. And of course, nobody, I mean, I'm not saying nobody, but basically nobody was working with sounds. Not since the 13th century, as far as I can tell. when there was a teacher called Abulafia who worked with sound. And every 100 years, maybe 8 or 9 people looked at it. I don't know, very, very few. It's discouraged. It wasn't a path within the system that was known. And so I had to follow my internal teaching. I had to have faith in that, and I had to follow it to wherever it took me. And it took me really far, and it's been very, very, very rich. And along the way, I had to get rid of my garbage, because that was the only way. My fear, I had to overcome fear about this, about being different, about carrying a different message than most people. I had to overcome that. I was terrified. I'm not saying, I didn't get up and start doing this 5 years ago. You know, I've been doing this for 30 years. So I had to overcome quite a lot. And then gradually I gained strength in what I was doing and began to use it working with people. And I'm very good at shifting energies with people and really getting them to flower. And because I have the gift of sight and I have the gift of being able to move things, et cetera, et cetera. But it all started from an investigation of myself, too. I mean, I had to overcome my fear. I had to overcome, what was the other thing that was big? I can't remember it right now. Basically, it was, you know, doing something that was very different and strange. And somehow being able to inhabit that and not apologize for it.
I would like to thank you, Shulamit, on behalf of all of us here and the Rondout Valley Holistic Health community, and deep appreciation for your
Thank you.
sharing
Thank you for
today.
inviting me, and I hope you get practice.